Hi there. In this video, we will talk about the controls that could be made on the database. But before we go through this chapter, let us have a quick review on the topics that we covered over the last 5 chapters. If you remember, in the first chapter, we talk about the supply chain and the value chain. We said the supply chain has 3 elements: the value chain, along with purchasing and distribution functions. The value chain has 2 parts: primary activities and support activities. And out of those activities, we were able to build up the 5 cycles, starting by expenditure cycle, production cycle, revenue cycle, financing cycle, and HR cycle. So this was pretty much what we covered in chapter 1. And then we start talking about the database, how to enter the data. We can do it either manually or automatically. Then storing the data on records, codes, and elements, processing the data either in groups, we call it batch, or one by one online real time. And we get the output of the data in form of documents or query or report. And this was the main talk in chapter 2. Then we start to depict or illustrate the data using 3 different forms. The first one, we call it data flow diagram. And I hope you remember it from chapter 3 and the lucid chart that we use it to build up our data flow diagram. Flow chart, which mainly has documents and processes, and the business process diagram. And this was mainly showing us how to visualize the movement of the data and the documents throughout the database. Then in chapter 4, we start talking about building a real database using Microsoft Access, where we start building tables, forms, queries, and reports. And then we start to investigate the data to see what are the risks that can hit the database. And we focused mainly on 3 types of risks: either hacking or social engineering or malware. We say hacking will attack usually the computer system. Social engineering usually attacks the individuals. And then malware, any device that we could have on the database. Now, in this chapter, we need to go one step further. We say, how can we control the risks? So in this chapter, which is strongly related to the prior chapter, is how to set up the different types of controls to minimize or hopefully eliminate the risk. And the first point we will discuss it in this chapter in our control process is what are the types of controls that we can have. First, we could have preventive controls, detective controls, corrective controls. And also we can have general controls and application controls. And this would be the first point we will discuss it in this chapter. Then we will talk about levers of controls, belief systems, and boundary systems. And those systems are designed to address the preventive controls. And then we have diagnostic control system and interactive system. And then we talk about the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, which is the main regulation that has been made to control the employees from taking bribes or gifts for releasing some information. And we should penalize this at the criminal side and the civil side. And then we will talk about Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to discuss these key points. So what do we mean by preventive control? Preventive control, it's the control we create before we start entering the data on the database. For example, we need to get an approval for the transactions. We need to get authorization for the person to enter the data on the database, verification that what has been entered is matching with the document, and then separate the duties of different employees to make sure one employee can verify the actual work of another employee. We call it segregation of duties. So those are the types of preventive control. Then detective, and this is a second step on control that usually happens after the data entry to make sure that all the data that has been entered correct, and if there is any error, hopefully we can detect it. And this is the reason we call it detective control. So preventive control, we make it before the data entry. Detective, we make it after data entry, where we can make reconciliation. For example, we reconcile the GL with the bank statement, or we make review to the different transactions in one account, or we analyze the data, make sure that the actual figures are matching with the budget figure. And if there is any variance, we need to investigate it and interrogate the variance. Then we make benchmarking, and we use CAT, which is the computer-assisted audit techniques, to detect any error. Finally, corrective control. And here, once we find the error from detective control, we have to take an action for the executive management and hopefully the audit committee to correct any variance and ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. So here we make system restoration if some viruses come to the system, control changes, data validity, insurance. In case we found an employee stole some money, we need to can get it back through the insurance policy and so on. So the main types we do it here for minimizing the risk, which we discussed it in the previous chapter, is to do preventive, detective, and corrective. On the other hand, we can make a matrix for all the areas that we can have, and this is what you can see it here, for all the risks that could happen, and for all the controls that we can make it, and then we can assign either a preventive or detective or corrective control over the different attacks that could happen to the database. The next point is classifying the controls into general and application. And this classification is different from the previous classification we have it. General control, we make it to ensure that the information system and control environment are stable and well managed. So here we talk about the environment itself. But the application, from the name, you can tell that this is related to the information. So general control related to environment, but application related to information to prevent, detect, and correct any transaction or error. And this figure here can help us to understand the relation between general control and application control. The general control happens from outside, where we can identify the risks that could happen to the data. The application control will make it from inside to ensure that there is different controls on the different cycles that we have, it mainly for the data entry, to make sure that we are able to prevent any error or detect it if it happens. So remember that we have two different types of control: preventive, detective, corrective, which is one group, general and application, which is another group. Now let us talk about the levers of control. As I said, we have 4 different levers. The first one, we call it belief system. That this one, we make it in the mindset of the employees to inspire and guide the organizational search and discovery. Make sure that the student, they have the mindset to believe that the control is very useful for protecting the database. The second one is to put boundaries for the employees, stake out the territory by providing limits on the freedom to act. And here we put all the items that can prevent the employee from making mistakes or errors. Then diagnostic control, which will help us to diagnose, like detective control, to detect the error, and then interactive to correct the error. So this classification of the levers are matching with the types of control where we can detect the error, diagnose the error, and put some correction for the error. Finally, what are the different regulations that have been promulgated on the area of risk and control? The most popular one that has been issued in 1977, it's the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, and which is mainly has been placed for the governmental officials to prevent them from taking anything of value in order to obtain unfair advantages. First of all, we need to know who are the governmental officials, and the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act was giving examples of those officials like doctors in state-owned or operated hospitals, professors, purchasing agent, family members of the above individuals, but also the circle of those employees might be expanded. And then what are the value they should take, and we should stop them from taking this value. It's either cash or lavish gifts or payment of travel expenses, loans, charitable contributions, and so on. So based on the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, the governmental employees are not allowed to take anything of value to give any unfair advantage by giving a contract or a bidding or a competition or secret information about anything. The employees are not allowed to do that. Then in 2002, we got Sarbanes-Oxley Act that put pressure on the CEO and the CFO to review the financial statements and disclose their responsibilities for all the information of the financial statement, that they are reliable, and they were able to create the internal control system that can eliminate the mistakes, and they are in charge of all the operational effectiveness and efficiency. So this is in brief what we need to know in this video. First of all, the classification of controls, then the levels of controls, and the different regulations that have been issued in controls. Thank you so much, and I hope you find this video useful. Bye-bye.